Now, thanks, guys. We at the National Press Club like lively debates, so let's go to an early point of distinction between you two, whether Australia is a low or high taxing jurisdiction. Now, Allegra, you said before that Australia relies more on income tax than most OECD countries, and backing that up is actually Richard Dennis here with his document, which shows that when it comes to income tax, Australia is, well, there's New Zealand, Iceland, Denmark that collect more. So that sort of seems to contradict your argument, Richard, but first to you.
Look, I think let's look at our tax system and then look at income tax in particular. So, you know, Australia, you know, I've seen the stats, Australia in relative terms is not a high taxing country, and that's a decision that we've made. You know, we have looked at the US and how they do things, and we're like, you know what, we don't want to be like them. But we have also, you know, looked at Nordic countries and those models, and we're not saying, well, we necessarily want to be like them either. Australia has walked different courses, and I think we should be, you know, proud of that and say, look, we have made deliberate choices that are different to other countries. But where Australia is distinctive is we rely a lot on taxing working age population. And the problem I have with this, and the thing that really concerns me, is like when you're working, you know, and I'm looking at my young team in front of me, when you're working, you know, you're trying to save for a house. You're trying to pay rent, you know, you're trying to raise your kids and pay all those expenses. Those are the taxes that really, it's when you actually need your money most, to be honest, is when there's those early mid-years. And I think that's my concern with our tax system, is that we rely a lot on working age people, which puts a lot of pressure when there are a lot of other financial pressures at the same time. And plus, we're going to have fewer and fewer working age people than we have in the past. And so I think, you know, our tax policies as they now are set, you know, with the focus on income tax that we have in this country, has meant that we really push it on working age people, and we're, particularly the young ones, they're being left behind.
Look, to be clear, with the stage 3 tax cuts, everyone earning under $100,000 is going to be a lot better off in saving for their house too, and saving and paying their rent too. So yes, I can imagine a high-income earner who wishes they were getting an even bigger tax cut, and I can imagine a high-income earner who thinks if only they got that tax cut, they'd be closer to getting their house. But they'd be beating someone at the auction who didn't get that tax cut. Yeah. So we need to be really clear here that we're talking about how, if at all, and we don't have to fix any problems, it's a democracy. We've ignored climate change for long enough. We can ignore inequality if we'd like to. If we want to reduce inequality, there's only one way to do it. The people at the bottom, their incomes have to rise faster than the people at the top.
But Richard, back to the question, it's about composition, as you say.
Yep.
But it's correct to say that when it comes to income tax, only New Zealand, Iceland, United States are higher.
No,
you're defining it in a particular way, aren't you?
Everyone's defining everything in a particular way.
It doesn't help.
Well, that's why we put it in here. Let's be clear. Australia has a dishonest debate about tax. Most Australians think we're high tax. This is not true. Most Australians think our income taxes are high. This is not true. The reason I included that number in this is that's the one number. That's the one number that Innes Willox and the business community love to rely on. That's why it's there. I'm not trying to hide it. I'm trying to explain it. So let me explain it. Australia doesn't collect much tax. But of the little bit of tax we do collect, a lot of it comes from personal income tax.
You and I agree.
All right.
You've got to explain it. We're having a tax reform debate. We don't collect much tax. But of the little bit of tax we collect, a lot of it comes from personal income tax. If we had a carbon tax, our reliance on personal income tax would look lower. If we had a mining tax, our reliance on personal income tax would look lower. Now, a lot of people can't do statistics in their head. The reason I put that number there, I'm glad you've asked me about it, is because we've had people cherry-picking numbers like that for years, and until it stops, we're going to get nowhere.
OK, let's go straight to a guy who can actually do statistics in his head. Andrew Tillett.
Thanks, Probes, I think. I was going to raise about taxation being legalised theft, but I don't think we'll go there. But no, my question, Andrew Tillett from the Financial Review and also board member here at the Press Club. Allegra, believe it or not, in 12 months' time, we could be on the campaign trail. If we end up with the situation with a hung parliament, would you make genuine tax reform a condition of your support for either Prime Minister Anthony Albanese or Opposition Leader Peter Dutton to become Prime Minister?
I think, wow, we're talking about hung parliament already. Look,
Joy of a 3-year system.
yeah, for me, to be honest, I hope that we don't get to that phase, I'll be honest, because I think that, you know, both the government and the opposition, you know, will be under significant political pressure to take to real tax reform to the next election. I don't see how the government can get away with, you know, having, you know, let's be honest, they have said, you know, broken a promise on what they were going to do. They said they were going to not make any changes to tax. They have made substantial changes to tax. I don't think they can go to the next election and say, you know what, we're not going to make any changes to tax. They will not be believed. So this is their choice now. This is the opportunity the government has to say, okay, there are some really significant issues with our tax system. This is the time to change it, to look that in the face and to go to the election with that. And ditto from an opposition point of view. They can say no, no, no. They can criticise all they like, but until they're serious about putting a policy forward, I think a lot of people will say, well, what's your plan instead? And so, you know, I hope very much that we won't get to that phase. If it comes to that, you know, I would certainly say that should be a negotiation point if we come to a hung parliament.
Thank you.
Okay. Rhiannon Down.
Hello, Rhiannon Down from the Australian newspaper. Thank you for your speeches. Allegra, the Teal independents have talked about bringing integrity back into politics. Do you think some of your fellow Teal MPs are being hypocritical by endorsing a broken election promise?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that second half of that?
Do you think some of your Teal MPs are being hypocritical by endorsing a broken election promise on stage 3 tax cuts?
Look, I think the government made their choice about taking stage 3 tax cuts to the election, and they have made their choice to abandon it. That is the government's broken promise. I don't think that's up to the MPs. For me, you know, my job right now is to go to my community and say, okay, what do you think? Because this is a fundamental change, and I think this is also going to be the most significant cost of living relief package that, you know, I think the government is going to be offering this year. And so I think that's what we're trying to do, or that's certainly what I'm doing. I'm going to my community and saying, okay, you know, this is a fundamental change. This is going to make a big difference to different people. What do you think? And that's where I'm, you know, seeing to date, there's a mix of views in the community. There are a lot of people who say, this makes a really big difference right now. You know, I'm having a hard time. You know, it's really important to me. There are people who are saying, you know what, I'm losing out, but I think that's okay because I want to help other people. I think this is tough. And then there is that third group that I mentioned, you know, who said, you know, they relied on it. I think that comes to the issue. Like, I don't think the government had to take stage 3 to the election, but once they did, people relied on it, and you can't blame them to say, okay, when they were doing their budget, I'm going to save this money for, you know, putting this to mortgage and putting this to rent. And that is the part that really hurts people, is because they were relying on it. So that's why I think it's really tough.
Richard, you've already told us you don't mind some broken promises, but how much damage does it do on the way through?
It does do damage, and I regret that I broke a promise to be here today. I had promised to be at another event, and when the Press Club rang me last week and asked me to come, I rang the event organisers and I said, I lied, I broke a promise. And they said, I understand the context in which you broke that promise, Richard, and I think that's a great opportunity and you should take it. That's what grown-ups do.
Okay, next question.
No, let me put it into economic context. In the lead up to the last election, the Reserve Bank governor said that he didn't expect to increase interest rates until 2024. You know what? He did. 13 times. And everyone's mortgages went up while they were waiting for the tax cuts, and people's rents went up. Promises are contextual. I don't think Labor should have gone to the last election promising to support the stage 3 tax cuts, because they were a bad idea. But even if they'd promised to do them and I thought they were a good idea at the time, even if I'd have supported them at the time, and then interest rates went up 13 times and energy prices went up and real wages fell, and they turned around and said, I think we should break our promise, I'd still be sitting here today saying, good call. That's what grown-ups do.
Ben Westcott.
Ben Westcott from Bloomberg, and just on your last point, Richard, Phil Lowe did lose his job over what he said around that. Anyway, Andrew Tillett stole my questions. Here's a different one. The cost of living crisis is temporary, but these tax cut changes are for presumably at least a decade, a long time at least. What's your response to the argument that this is a permanent solution to what is essentially a temporary crisis?
There are no permanent solutions. Can we all just get over that? What we need governments to do every term of office is change policies to help achieve their stated objectives and to cope with circumstances as they come along. The Coalition was in power for 10 years and never, ever increased a tax bracket. Now they're talking about what will happen to middle income earners if Labor never changes tax cuts ever again for the next 10 years. There's the problem. So the question is, right now, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, when real wages are falling and cost of living is rising, and if we don't change these tax rates, we're going to give nothing to people earning below $45,000, not a cent. So if we don't give them support through changes stage 3, the only options are do nothing to help them or spend billions, tens of billions of dollars to help them. Can you imagine if the government stuck with the stage 3 tax cuts and said, but here's $10 billion in income support for low-income Australians? People would be baying about, oh, you're going to cause inflation. So the option available to us today is change stage 3 to help low-income earners, do nothing and say to low-income earners, bad time to be poor, or shovel money onto the problem and get criticised for causing inflation. None of those. That's why the Prime Minister put it off for 2 years. That's a tough decision. And he's waited to see how things have worked out because these tax cuts kick in July 1. So is it a permanent thing that he's done? Well, it's a permanent thing that he's going to introduce this bill. And you know what we can do next year or the year after that? Introduce some other legislation. The question is, do we do something or not? And of all the somethings, which one hurts the least? That's why I support the change they've made.
Esther Linda.
Hello, Esther Linda from Australian Associated Press. My question is to Allegra. A common refrain from the Teal MPs during this debate is that you've all been canvassing your communities in order to understand how they feel about the changes. Is Wentworth able to fairly weigh up the competing interests in the stage 3 changes, given it's the wealthiest electorate in Australia?
Yeah, I think it is. And to be honest, if you look at the stats, 66% of Wentworth will benefit from these changes. So I know everyone has a view on Wentworth, but it is much more diverse than most of the country would expect. So, you know, there are 66% of Wentworth who are already saying, you know what, in broad terms, for most people, they're saying this is a good thing. And, you know, but I think we are also the biggest electorate, the electorate with the biggest proportion of people who are going to lose out. And so I think it is fair to ask them, you know, you were promised something. The government didn't have to make that promise. They did make that promise. And people do take governments on their word, to say, well, how do you feel about that? And that's why I think it's really important to ask the community about that. And I said there is this sense of this split, you know, and I do think, you know, on the results we've had so far, you know, there is majority of support out there for this change, and I think there's actually a really significant group of people who would have benefited who are also saying, you know what, you know, we want to help other people. This is a really hard time right now.
And sorry, just quickly, in the 2019 election, when Labor opposed all of stage 3 and proposed changes to negative gearing, changes to franking credits and changes to capital gains tax, the seat of Kooyong, Josh Frydenberg's seat, swung 7% to Labor. All of the Teal seats swung to Labor in 2019 when Labor was opposed to all of stage 3 and to a lot of much more ambitious tax reform on wealth. So, you know, let's look at the scoreboard. When Labor in 2019 put up a progressive, radical tax agenda, high-income electorates voted for it. Bass and Braddon in northern Tasmania swung against them, and that's why they lost office. But high-income voters supported the 29 changes.
Allegra, to borrow from John Lennon, your electorate's more likely to shake its jewellery than applause, such as its demography. If that's the case, then you've already got your answer when you've said 66% are going to benefit. So where's your vote?
Look, I'm still working that out because I don't think...
Really?
Yeah, I
You're
really
really
am.
working it out?
Yeah, I am. And I'm serious, and I think that's important because, you know, I want to make sure that the broad aspect of the electorate is behind it. Otherwise, we will get into purely, sort of mob, this idea that mob rule, like, if you're a minority, it doesn't matter what you think. And I do think that as, I want to have a conversation with the community. I said I would represent my community, and that means really understanding what they think.
Okay.
And I'm really proud to do that.
Paul Cupp.
Paul Karp from The Guardian, thanks very much. The Coalition has said that their principle is that nobody should get less than stage 3. Could I ask both of you, but starting with Allegra, please, what do you think of a possible amendment to make the Labor package even more generous by not taking from high income earners to pay for the tax cuts for the low and middle income earners?
Look, I think... so my position is actually I support cutting income tax for lower income earners. I think it's actually, that is a really positive part of this, but I also support, reducing basically taxes on labour on people who are working across the board. But I think you need tax reform to pay for this. I don't think you can just say, well, we'll just cut. And that is the problem, I think, with, the original tax policy. As I said before, it was all, it's all sugar. It's all like, here you have the money, but we're not dealing with that reform. And the point on the reform, the reason why I keep on going on about this is because there are bigger issues at play, that have that have a long-term impact on people right now. And so this intergenerational equity, that is a really big issue. The fact that, we have low productivity, that is a big issue. The fact that we can't, we're choosing the expensive path down for our climate action, that is also an issue. And so I think if they're looking at any of those sorts of reforms, they have to work out how they're going to pay for it. And I don't think that's simply cutting tax. I think that's actually rebalancing and reforming the tax system. And I frankly think we haven't had the conversation yet as a country around this because both the major parties won't have those conversations. And again, that's what I'm trying to do.
Look, what the Coalition are proposing, if they want no one to be worse off but low and middle income earners to be better off, is much bigger, more expensive tax cuts. I'm not quite sure which other of the Liberals' principles that fits with, but it certainly wouldn't be good for the budget deficit, and in this climate it probably would be inflationary. So again, we have to look at how hard the choices on the table are. What Labor's done is recast within an existing spending bubble. They've taken from one group and given to another group. I think that makes a lot of sense in this crisis. For the Liberals to say everybody leaves with a prize, what they're really saying is we don't care about the budget deficit, we don't care about inflation. That's interesting. I hope they own that. Relatedly, well, I think a hard question for the Coalition is, will they support these tax cuts for low and middle income earners before the Dunkley by-election or after? I think reality's going to bite, and the only thing Peter Dutton's in control of at the moment is the timing of that. So relatedly, you talk about the Coalition, where are the National Party MPs on this? The National Party represent the lowest income electorates in the country. We've had National Party MPs out saying that, $190,000 isn't a lot of money. I've referred people to this top secret thing called the OECD website. I'd encourage maybe some MPs to have a look at something called the census, because I tell you there aren't a lot of people in most National Party seats earning anything like $190,000. So the coalition between the Liberal Party and the National Party, you might be able to understand why once upon a time they were trying to win inner city seats by throwing large tax cuts at high income earners. Maybe that's what Scott Morrison was trying to do in 2018. But what is the National Party trying to do in 2024?
Pablo Vinales.
Pablo Vinales, SBS. Thank you. Australia's reliance on personal income tax is obviously not alleviated by these changes. And Allegra, you mentioned some of the areas where you'd like to see changes more broadly in the tax system. I wanted to get your views on unwinding negative gearing in particular. And do you think constituents in your electorate that are beneficiaries of this concession would be in favour?
That's why, what I've said from the beginning is I think we need to take packages of reforms to the people, and to deal with, I think, the big issues in relation to intergenerational equity, in relation to productivity and to climate action. Now, I've seen the rule in, rule out this week on negative gearing, and I think that, frankly, is so destructive to what we're trying to do right now, the opportunity we have, which is actually have a profound conversation about tax. We should be looking at, how do we make sure that we reduce our reliance on income taxes? And sure, negative gearing, savings taxes, capital gains taxes, they should be on the table. And those are the trade-offs that I'm trying to put forward in Green Paper, and that's what I'm going to be taking to the community. So I think we should, consider those sorts of changes, and I think my community is open to considering those sorts of changes, but they also need to see, well, what's the benefit? If we constantly just look at changes in isolation without sort of trade-offs and actually putting together real packages, then I think you won't get the support. But I think if we can build consensus around a package of changes that have winners and losers and balance, then I think you will get consensus. And that's really what is up for me to try and deliver.
Nick Stewart.
Two fantastic speeches. You've both agreed that we really need to shuffle the tax system. But isn't the reason that this has come to the fore the problem with housing? Shelter is such a critical element for everybody, no matter who they are. What answer can we find that will either shift the tax system but give us more houses so that people can actually live in Australia? Mm-hmm.
I might jump in there. Look, I think you're absolutely right. I have to say, I think economically, housing is the hardest issue for many Australians right now. We are a rich country, but we don't feel rich, and families are under pressure because our housing is so expensive, and it is a fundamental problem that we have. And that is also why the younger generation is slipping behind. A significant part of that is due to housing. So that's why stamp duty should be on the table, and land tax. That shift is really important to increasing basically 350,000 more people in New South Wales alone would own a home if we made that split. We also need to look at other tax implications, such as, capital gains tax and negative gearing. They should definitely be on the table. But let's be honest, the biggest driver of housing costs in this country have also the most significant driver has been supply. And so, I think the government has recognised this, is doing things on this, needs to do more, and we need to really be pushing this. This is going to take 10, 20 years to get right. It's taken 20 years of absolutely failed policy at every level of government to get into the crisis that we are in right now.
Look, again, maybe if we were serious about fixing this, we could look at maybe any other country in the world and see how are they going. Because as Allegra said, Sydney, that's got negative gearing and it's got capital gains tax concessions, has the second most expensive housing in the world, and it's getting more expensive. So guess what? Negative gearing and capital gains concessions haven't helped. Maybe they're not big enough. Well, that's logically one possibility, isn't it? Or maybe they don't help at all. So what other countries do, and stick with me, this gets a bit complicated,
and you might have to be quick here because we're going to try and squeeze in another question.
It's really complicated in other countries. What a lot of governments do is borrow money and build houses and rent them to people.
Okay, and the last question we have today is from Daniel Holmes.
Hey, thanks very much. Are tax cuts like these just another way of shrinking the size of government, really? I mean, it's inevitable. We know that government spending is going to need to go up in the future, and we've got a shrinking tax base. So how do you present a tax cut like this without shrinking the size of government?
Well, in the short term, that's exactly right, and that's the point I made in the speech, that we're already $100 billion behind the OECD average, and we just dropped another $20 billion. But we should do that right now because we are in a cost of living crisis and there's no other available option to help millions of Australians. But in the long run, we need to broaden the tax base. I agree with that part of the tax reform. We need to broaden the tax base. We need to tax pollution. We need to tax the resources industry. We need to close loopholes. I don't mind if we tax land, but to be clear, here in Canberra, we've shifted from stamp duty to land tax, and guess what? We've got expensive housing too. So we're going to have to collect more tax. We're going to have to spend more money, but there's a difference between what we need to do right now and where we need to get to.
Allegra?
The taxes that are being handed back, they are mainly or significantly due to bracket creep. Like there's a significant amount of tax that is due to income taxes, people just paying more. And at the moment, while you're right that Australia is a low taxing country compared to many other countries, you know, our tax take from income tax is actually really high right now by historical standards. So I think that, you know, the choice is not whether the government gets, it's also about whether it stays in people's pockets. And I think in the moment right now, when people are facing really, you know, difficult circumstances, the question is, well, wouldn't I like that money to be in my pocket right now so I can pay for my rent, so I can pay for my mortgage and my electricity bill? So that is, I think, really the question that, you know, why I think it is appropriate that we are giving people money back. And frankly, you know, I think, you know, how I see it is I would support, you know, I'd love to see more low and medium income people get more tax back. I think that's really important because then they can make the choices about, you know, the things that they want to spend money on. And I think that is the system that we are trying to create.
And with that thought, we will have to wrap up. I'm not sure if we solved anything today except for a couple of things. Tax is good. And we have a search for consensus. So can you join me in thanking Allegra Spender and Richard Dennis?
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.